10 Historical Circus Wonders. In the past, we're talking the Middle Ages here. Disabilities or physical manifestations of medical conditions did not elicit the kind of awe and interest that later inspired sideshows. For a lot of history, people with atypical presentations were seen as harbingers of evil spirits or bad omens. We mention this not to pat ourselves on the back for how far we've come when it comes to medical diagnosis and treatment, but to point out that for a long time, we traded one kind of othering for another. 10. Giant tumors. Flatulence is a normal part of life, unless you can do it at will. This next sideshow performer figured out how to cash in on his ability. Le Pétomane, real name. Joseph Pujol was a French sideshow performer who made his name in the late 19th century. His act was flatulence, and his skill was unsurpassable. And like a few other acts we've seen, Le Pétomane's brilliance was at least partly attributable to an interesting anatomical feature. He could take up great masses of water or air into his rectum, and then spout them out with great control. 9. The Flatulist Act. If you think there's just one fake sideshow on the list, I have some magic beans to sell you. Sideshows have historically been rife with hoaxes, and in some ways they're even more fun than the real acts. There's something of a relief in seeing the audience exploited as opposed to the performers. Pascual Pinon, also known as the Two-Headed Mexican, is a kind of in-between sideshow performer, although, spoiler, he didn't really have two heads, he did have a medical condition that gave him his start. 8. Two-Headed Folk. If you think there's just one fake sideshow on the list, I have some magic beans to sell you. Sideshows have historically been rife with hoaxes, and in some ways they're even more fun than the real acts. There's something of a relief in seeing the audience exploited as opposed to the performers. Pascual Pinon, also known as the Two-Headed Mexican, is a kind of in-between sideshow performer, although, spoiler, he didn't really have two heads, he did have a medical condition that gave him his start. Pinon was actually a rail worker in Texas with a large tumor growing from his head. A promoter saw him one day and, like any reasonable person, thought, I should absolutely pretend that's a second head and put him in a traveling show. They put a wax mask on the tumor, so it resembled a frankly super fake looking face and basically had Pinon sit quietly as strangers gawked. 7. Dwarfism as show. This one goes on the list not because it's bizarre in and of itself. We're putting it up for scrutiny because conditions like dwarfism were presented as sideshow. This is one of the most offensive stories about the circus and its history. Simply put, it should be seen as patently bizarre that medical conditions were ever considered entertainment. And let's not pretend that a showman like P.T. Barnum was ever satisfied with simply presenting his performers as it is. Take Tom Thumb, real name, Charles Stratton, the dwarf who became a wildly popular performer in the mid-19th century. Was it good enough for the 2-foot-tall, 60.96 centimeters, Thumb to merely exist as a performer? Of course not. Although Tom was only 5 years old when he started performing, Barnum told him to tell the audience he was 11. More shocking, you see. 6. The Fiji Mermaid. But enough of our pseudo-sideshows. Let's get to the real thing. And by the real thing, we actually mean the totally fake thing that was discovered to be an utter hoax. A selection of bizarre sideshows wouldn't be complete without a few made-up wonders, and one of the most well-known swindles was the Fiji, sometimes called Fiji Mermaid. It all started with a Dr. J. Griffin who came to New York in 1842, supposedly in possession of a mermaid caught off the coast of the Fiji Islands. The press got wind of the mermaid, and Dr. Griffin whetted their appetites with a peek. 5. World's Ugliest Acts. This bizarre sideshow makes it on the list not because the performer herself was bizarre, but because, like our piece on dwarfism, it points out how totally strange it is that sideshows could feature such an attraction. That attraction was Mary Ann Bevan, which the Coney Island Dreamland Circus, and later Ringling Bros, gleefully touted in the 1920s as the world's ugliest woman. Never mind that Bevan suffered from acromegaly, a pituitary disorder that causes bone and facial disfigurement. Also, never mind that Bevan could not possibly be the world's ugliest woman, Because if you read YouTube comments, you'll learn that many make that claim about a whole host of people, and consensus is unheard of. 4. Drunken acrobatics. If you were to tell me that acting like a drunk fool was a lucrative sideshow act, you better believe that I could have made a mint in college. I rue the days I spent letting my performances go to waste on spectators who didn't pay me a dime. Of course, my routine wasn't quite as practiced as the one sideshows made famous. One famous performer named Ben Bilva, not his real name, extremely unsurprisingly, made being drunk look like a lot of fun and scared the audience half to death with his acrobatic stunts that looked all the more terrifying if you were under the impression he was intoxicated. 3. The Oklahoma outlaw mannequin mummy. Before his death, Elmer McCurdy was the stuff that spaghetti westerns were made of. After it, he became the kind of character that Alfred Hitchcock or David Lynch might dream up. A small-time crook in the early 20th century, McCurdy was shot by authorities after a train robbery in 1911. The Oklahoma funeral home that ended up with the body had the bright idea of embalming him for display. They embalmed him with such gusto, however, that he became mummified. 5 years later, a sideshow promoter saw McCurdy in the funeral home display and, pretending to be a relative, took the body for his own exhibition, where McCurdy became the Oklahoma outlaw. For the next 60 years, McCurdy's body was passed from show to show. 2. Human blockhead acts. Perhaps you've become inured to the human blockhead routine, simply because it's pretty popular in sideshow culture and has been for a long time. But it can be argued the blockhead deserves a place on the list exactly for that reason. An act where one determines the exact location a sharp object can enter the nasal cavity, and then physically jams said sharp object into the location with force and precision is totally bizarre. The blockhead routine works by taking advantage of our basic anatomy. The nasal cavity has space in which a nail, a drill, a spike, or some other horrifying object can glide in without damage or pain. Well, with plenty of practice, try it at home and you'll encounter plenty of damage and pain. 1. Regurgitation acts. We've seen some pretty bizarre acts, from drunk acrobats to flatulists. But I say with utter confidence that the most bizarre, and perhaps most delightful, act is our no one. Let's get to the real head-scratchers that make us wonder, how do they do it? Or maybe more to the point, who wants to see them do that? Not sure what I mean? Well, let's just say that one of our top sideshow act went by the name The Great Regurgitator. Step right up, I guess, but maybe not too close. Yup, vomiting. And its more benign cousin waterspouts were a sideshow act that records show existed even in the 17th century. Basically, performers could either take some sort of substance to make them copiously expel, or they trained themselves to harness stomach and throat muscles to their command. Either way, you had a rather messy show. What do you think of our video? Let me know in the comment section below. Before you go, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.